Well, look at this glorious spring day. I'm going to pan around, show you some of the bluebells behind me. I'm standing quite close to where the proposed realignment of the Norwich Western Link will be. We still don't know the full details. We're having to wait for the council to release plans, which they almost certainly have much greater detailed plans of, but are holding on to really know how this will impact the landscape here. But what I can tell you is that just behind me, there's a little, where those bluebells are, that's a little strip of ancient woodland. You've got a mix of hazel coppice and oak standards, as well as some lovely sort of specimens of very veteran field maple. In fact, there's one directly behind me to one side of my head. And this little strip of ancient woodland, I'm not even sure if it's designated ancient woodland, but it almost certainly is ancient woodland, will be affected by the construction of this road, almost certainly. If the realignment goes where we think it's going to go, they'll need to put in mitigation, such as a green bridge or an underpass, to try to mitigate for the enormous habitat fragmentation that will happen when they disconnect the various bits of woodland that the road goes through. And when they build that green bridge, it'll have to extend quite a long way either side of the road that they're building. And bearing in mind that the road itself is quite a large feature. It's going to be, it's a dual carriageway. You're going to have a dual carriageway. You're going to have the verges on either side. It is quite a wide feature. So that green bridge will have to go over that and extend quite a long way either side. And the construction of that will almost certainly impact this little strip of ancient woodland, but also the larger area of ancient woodland which is behind me. So this is of obvious concern. Natural England has brought out a recent set of regulations that developers and planners have to adhere to regarding veteran trees, ancient trees and ancient woodland. And these include not just the obvious direct damage that is caused by road building, such as the destruction, the cutting down of woodland and this sort of thing, but perhaps less obvious things. Certainly the habitat fragmentation that will occur. And bearing in mind that, this realignment is apparently to avoid an area of woodland where the barbasol bat has a maternity colony, they are in fact bringing the road closer to another block of woodland where there's a much greater concentration of barbasol bat maternity colonies. And the bats are travelling basically up and down this track that I'm standing on in order to get down to the Wensum Valley. If the road bisects this, then what we're going to see is the bats finding it more difficult to get to where they need to eat, where their main meal is, which is down in that valley over there. But also the woodlands around here, which are going to be destroyed by the road, although some of them are perhaps not as ancient or as grand, they are important for those bats. The bats come and feed there as soon as they come out of their roosts. It's the first thing they do is flit around this woodland, eating little insects, eating little midges and moths and so on and so forth, before they whiz off further afield, many kilometres, in fact, in search of their main meal of the day. So that's a concern, the way this road will interfere with that movement. But it's also fragmenting the habitat in general. We're going to see it, the badger colonies around here, which they have a certain amount of sort of movement and interbreeding between them those badgers are going to be less able to get around. Deer are going to be less able to move up and down towards the water. All sorts of the, all sorts of wildlife will be impacted. But the thing about the nesting birds, a lot of nesting birds around here. You stick a road through here, and one of the impacts that is going to happen is the noise, the vibration, the pollution is going to make this a less attractive place for birds to nest. And at the moment, well, I mean, I know that we've got a lot of bird life here, and it's biodiverse, and we've got certainly we spotted species like the red kite and on one occasion a peregrine falcon around here. So there's plenty to sustain those birds. We don't know precisely what is nesting here because the council has not released its nesting bird surveys, which it carried out a year ago. A year. And they're saying that those surveys are not ready yet, that those reports are not ready yet. It feels like they're just holding on to data for the sake of it. Perhaps they're concerned about us finding out exactly what is nesting in the woods that they intend to destroy. But going back to my point, you stick a road through here, it's going to have an effect going deep into the woods on either side, making those woods less attractive for both nesting birds and for roosting bats. Whilst it won't be going directly through the woods where the bat colonies are, those woods will become less attractive for those bats to live in. Come here, 10 years, 20 years time, I very much doubt we'll have the barbasol bat colonies in these woods, just as they have vanished from the woods alongside the existing NDR. There are other impacts to consider as well. The way the pollutants from this road will affect the flora and fauna here. That's a less obvious thing. It's perhaps invisible, but the microplastics, the pollutants from petrol and diesel cars, all of these things are going into the environment. There's a lot to be concerned about, and we're just not convinced. We're just not convinced at this stage that the council has real answers to the problems it faces here. So we're getting closer and closer to thinking about the way this project will go to planning and so on and so forth. And we're getting closer and closer to a decision from the Department for Transport on the funding. And my message to the Department for Transport is that this project is not safe. The costs are only going to rise when it comes to questions of mitigation. The costs are only going to rise when it comes to the huge engineering task of building a heavy viaduct on very loose sedimentary rocks, soils that are laid on top of a bedrock of chalk, which itself might be quite unstable. These costs will rise. It's not a secure project. They're putting their money, they're backing the wrong horse basically if they put their money into this project. And that likewise would have an impact on the Norfolk taxpayer. Any overspill in the costs, well, those will most likely be borne by future generations of people living in Norfolk. Borehole drilling will be starting close to this spot really soon. It's scheduled to begin fairly imminently, and it'll actually be happening in the woodlands. And this is of concern because of the timing of it, really. We are, we're in spring. The birds are nesting. We have either, sort of birds actually sitting on nests, or fledglings emerging from nests. It's also a time when the bats have emerged from hibernation, and the pregnant bats will be gaining weight and getting ready to give birth later on in the summer. So it's a sensitive time of year for wildlife in this woodland. And what we know from our previous experience of them doing borehole drilling for geotechnical surveys is that it tends to... I just paused then for a rather noisy light aeroplane flying overhead, I think probably from Felthorpe. Where was I? Oh yeah, so the borehole drilling, we know from past experience, tends to be really noisy. Really noisy, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of vibration, there are a lot of vehicles involved. When they came to do it in a nearby bit of woodland in the autumn, which frankly the autumn is perhaps a more sensible time of year to be doing this, there was a certain amount of vegetation cleared, vehicles came in and out of the wood, that of course compacted the woodland soil, and you know, none of this is particularly good for woodland ecology. But the real concern for us is the timing of these geotechnical surveys. Spring, it feels as if they're rushing them before they report to the council in June. They should wait. They should put things in the right order. Okay, they should put things in the right order. Put nature first. Put the wildlife first. Okay, wait for the fledglings all to have left the nest, for things to be less sensitive in the woodland before they do their borehole drilling. Their borehole drilling, rather. I don't think that's too much to ask, but it's something that, you know, appears to be falling on deaf ears when it's mentioned to those who are in charge of the project.